Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to go over my rod and reel arsenal for 2023. I'm going to start with the heaviest setup that I have and I'm going to go down the line from there. This is the Shimano X-Pride. This is a 7'2" heavy power action rod. I have this paired with a Shimano Bantam MGL. I have this spooled up with, I believe it's 50-pound braid. I use it mainly for throwing frogs, for punching, for any heavy duty application like that. I also have an A-rig tied onto it right now. I will occasionally throw swim baits on this as well. I used to have a dedicated swim bait setup. I never used it all that often, so eventually I decided to sell that off and just use that rod for whenever I occasionally pick up a big swim bait. So that's the first one. The next rod is a 7'2" medium heavy Shimano X-Pride. I have this one paired up with a Shimano Curado, and this is the 151 MGL spool. Just picked this up a few months ago. This is the setup that I'm going to use for Texas rigs, chatterbait, heavier spinnerbait, stuff like that. My next setup is very similar to the last one. This is also a 7'2" medium heavy Shimano X-Pride, but this time I got it paired up with a Shimano Aldebaran reel. This is a very light reel, really good for finesse applications, and that's what I use this rod for. So with the last setup, I use that one for heavier lures. This is where I get down to the finesse stuff. So I've got a finesse jig on there right now. I throw little chatterbaits on this one and I throw my lighter spinnerbaits on this setup. So that's basically what this one is for. I really like that Shimano X-Pride, that 7'2" medium heavy. It's still a really light setup. And then just adding that Shimano Aldebaran makes this whole thing like feather light and is really good for all those finesse applications. All right, up next, this one's a little bit different than the last ones. This is still Shimano X-Pride, but this is the 7-foot medium. This is the glass composite model, and you can probably tell what I'm using that one for right off the bat. This is going to be for my mid-depth crankbaits. I don't really throw that heavy of a crankbait out here in Colorado. Usually it's the mid-size on down. So this is the setup that I use for that. I have that paired with the Shimano Curado 151 DC reel. I really like that DC reel because it really helps throwing these lighter crankbaits, especially in the wind, and we get a lot of wind out here in our Colorado reservoirs. I also have that paired up with 10-pound fluorocarbon. That's the size line that I like to use for throwing these mid-depth crankbaits. So really good rod, really good for throwing those 3XDs, wiggleworts, and similar types of crankbaits. Last but not least, this is my top water rod. This is a Shimano X-Pride 6'6" medium, and I have this one paired up again with a Shimano Curado 151 MGL, and I have that one paired up with 10-pound mono, and this is my top water rod. I'm going to be throwing this one for whopper ploppers, like mid-size whopper ploppers. I throw it for hoppers as well. Those are probably the two main baits that I throw on it. I will throw some small buzz baits on this, and one other thing that I like to use it for is square bills. So basically square bills and top water, that's what I use this rod for. All right, now getting to some of my spinning setup. That was it for the casting gear. This is the only rod that I actually use that is not a Shimano X-Pride. This is the Eagle Claw EC 3.5. This is my budget setup. I use this for light tube jigs. I throw some other small baits like spoons and cast masters and stuff like that, especially if I'm trout fishing. This is the rod that I also hand to my guests who I take out on the kayaks with me. I have that paired up with a Pflueger President. As you all probably know, that's one of the staples of a really nice budget reel. So this is my budget setup. Overall, this is a great setup for beginners. If you're looking for something to get started, I would recommend basically this exact setup. This is the 7-foot fast model of the EC 3.5, and this is a 2500 size Pflueger President reel spooled up with 10-pound braid to a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. All right, up next is my drop shot setup. Again, this is a Shimano X-Pride. This is the 7-foot Light Plus model, 6-pound fluorocarbon line. This is just straight fluorocarbon that I have on this setup. I have that paired with a Shimano Stratic reel. This is a 1000 size reel. Also have a little clip here that works really well for holding that drop shot weight. Otherwise, you'll be using that hook and you'll put that on the hook keeper and you just have that weight basically free and swinging around and getting tangled and stuff like that. So I really like having that little keeper for that drop shot weight. Keeps everything nice and clean. But yeah, that's all I really use this rod for, is drop shotting. All right, my next setup is very similar to the last one. Again, this is the same rod model. This is the Shimano X-Pride 7-foot Light Plus again. The only difference between this setup and the last one is that this reel is spooled up with 10-pound braid, and then I have a light fluorocarbon leader on the front there. Usually what I use this rod for is very finesse applications, Ned rigs and stuff like that. I currently have on here a little dynamic HD trout, very small little jerk bait that I'll occasionally throw for the trout out here in Colorado. But yeah, that's basically why I use it's for, dragging the bottom, some really light finesse applications, gulp minnows on a jig head, and Ned rigs and stuff like that. Last but not least, this is my final setup, Shimano X-Pride. This is a 7-foot medium power rod. This is what I'm mostly using for jerkbaits out here in Colorado, whether that's for trout, walleye, bass. We throw these all the time. This is actually the first X-Pride that I picked up that sold me on the lineup, and so I ended up converting the rest of my lineup to the Shimano X-Prides. This is paired up with a 2500 size Shimano Stradic reel once again. I believe I have 10-pound braid on there, and I varied the fluorocarbon leader size depending on the type of bait that I'm throwing. So that's it for the rod and reel arsenal. One thing that you probably picked up throughout the video is I'm throwing basically all Shimano on all my gear. The reason for that is I actually heard a presentation from KVD on the subject of brand loyalty. I used to have a hodgepodge of gear. I would have a mixture of Shimano, you know, Daiwa, Abu, all the different brands. It didn't really matter. I had just about a bit of everything. But every time I bought a new rod, there was a little bit of a question mark as to how that rod was going to perform. The tapers on the rod, the actions on the rod, the power of the rod, they differ from brand to brand. So the Eagle Claws, the EC 3.5, for example, I've noticed that the Eagle Claw rods run a little bit lighter than the Shimano ones. So a medium model EC 3.5 is not as heavy duty as a Shimano X-Pride medium model. Usually that's not a big deal after you buy the rod and you sort of learn what it's good for. Now you have an understanding of what you can use that rod to do. But I think in the long run, it's a good idea to just stick with a single brand so that you know when you're in the market for a new rod, you know exactly how it's going to perform, just like all the other rods that you own. So for that reason alone, I like to stick with Shimano. And everybody makes good rods and reels out there these days. I just happen to be a Shimano guy. So in the end, you end up with a very consistent rod lineup. Everything's X-Pride. If I ever need to add another X-Pride or another fishing rod to my arsenal, I'll pick up another X-Pride and I'll know exactly how it's going to perform based on the history of how the other rods have performed. I don't think it's as important with reels that you're going to be brand loyal. Gear ratios, for example, you know that a 6-to-1 gear ratio Shimano is going to be a 6-to-1 gear ratio on another Shimano. But if you get another brand of reel, it might be slightly different than that. So I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts if you think brand loyalty is important or not. Go ahead and leave your comments in the comment below. So if you guys like the video, do me a favor and help me grow the channel. Please hit that subscribe button. You can also like this video, share it, comment, do all that good stuff. And until next time, we'll catch you later.